Welcome back to Velshi on MSNBC. I'm Charles Coleman Jr. in for Ali today. Back with me is Ian Millhiser, who is a senior correspondent at Vox and author of The Agenda, How a Republican Supreme Court is Reshaping America, and Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor at Slate and author of Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. Ian, I want to start with you. There have been a lot of controversial cases that have come in front of the Supreme Court, but we're seeing an emerging trend of even more and more controversial cases that are getting before the high court. What does that tell you, and should that be a concern, especially given that you can't just go directly to the SCOTUS, it has to work its way up?
Right. So we have a 6-justice Republican supermajority on the Supreme Court. It's the first time in a long time we've had this partisan of a court. And they came in with an agenda. They have treated their short time with their supermajority as if they had a checklist. They said, well, overrule Roe v. Wade, check. Expand the Second Amendment, check. Get rid of affirmative action, check, and so on and so forth. Some of the things they've done are more technical, but they've been really, really huge, taking a bunch of power that was given to the executive branch and transferring it to themselves in the judiciary. That's what the student loans case was all about. So this is a court that's had a big checklist, and they keep checking off boxes. The question I am wondering, though, and I'm seeing some signs this term that maybe they've run out of items on their list. Because this term, they haven't been quite as aggressive as they were the previous 2 terms, but that's because they moved so quickly that, I almost got whiplash following how fast they were moving through their agenda items.
Dahlia, one of the things that has come up has been the notion of legitimacy, because as we've heard more and more about these ethical questions, there have been increasing concerns from the public about impartiality with respect to the justices. Can you talk a little bit about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, at least from a perception standpoint?
I'm sorry. Good morning, Charles. Good morning, Ian. And I have a wicked cold. Happy New Year. I think that the answer to that question is, in some sense, the answer that connects the 2 issues you started with, Charles, which is there are the cases on the docket, and then there are the ethics scandals. Those are the same story. Sometimes we cover them as though they're different stories. But one of the things that we are starting to see is that the same wealthy billionaires who are trying to pull apart the regulatory state, right? Do away with the administrative state. There are 3 cases on the docket this term, each of which would hobble the ability of regulatory agencies to do their jobs. And we've seen that happen, by the way, in the last 2 terms with an EPA case, a Clean Air Act case, a Clean Water case. So this is the same multi-billionaire donors who fly certain justices to conferences around the country, and the justices then rule on these cases. And none of this, as you said at the top, is disclosed. None of this is public. And so I think that there is a sense that the court is bought and sold. And the checklist that Ian just described, whether it's doing away with abortion, doing away with affirmative action in higher education, whether it's expanding gun rights, or, as I said, doing away with environmental laws, or making it harder and harder and harder to vote. All of that is part of an agenda that is bought and paid for by donors at secret conferences that none of us knew about until the press started to report it. And so I think the answer to your question is 2 things happened. 1, that checklist, whiplash speed. 2, the fact that the interests are being served over and over and over are the interests of a tiny minority of millionaires and billionaires that can't win at the polls. So they're trying to win by buying the court.
Ian, picking up exactly where Dahlia just left off, what do you make of the fact that it seems like the Supreme Court almost is displaying a level of contempt for the public opinion around many important issues, particularly women's reproductive rights, for example, as we look at, a post-Dobbs world? Like, what do you make of that? Because it does seem like none of these decisions are popular, irrespective of political affiliation.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that's changed in the last 20 or 30 years in the Supreme Court, there used to be liberal Republicans. John Paul Stevens was a liberal Republican. David Souter was at least a moderately liberal Republican. It used to be that you couldn't predict how a justice would vote based on the party of the president who appointed them. That's no longer true. A big part of that is the Federalist Society. Basically, what happened is that all of the conservative lawyers got organized. They speak to themselves only about what they want the law to be. And when Republican presidents get the chance to appoint a justice, they pick from this club of lawyers who only speak to each other and not either to the broader public or the broader legal community about what they think the Constitution and the rest of the law should stay. So you have this incredibly insular group that these justices have been drawn from. It is an insular group whose purpose is to make sure that there are no surprises. There aren't going to be any more liberal Republicans, and Democrats have their own checks to make sure there's no conservative Democrats anymore. And that's just toxic. Like the whole point of the judiciary is that you're supposed to have judges who decide cases based on somewhat objective principles. If they can't figure out what the objective principles are, they're supposed to use good judgment that is not partisan judgment. But now, for the first time really in American history, we know what a Democratic judge is going to do. We know what a Republican judge is going to do. There are institutions in place to make sure that no one strays too far from their party line. And that is not what you want in a judiciary.
Dahlia, we've been talking about legitimacy and transparency with respect to the court for a long time. And this year, a lot of conversations centered around the ethical considerations with respect to what those justices are held to. What has to happen and what should happen and what do you think is going to happen about the Supreme Court having some sense of checks in terms of its ethics on itself and the justices?
I mean, I'm sorry to say, Charles, I think the court's made it pretty plain what's going to happen, which is that they were going to do the bare minimum to assuage the public while at the same time blaming the public, right? There was an ethics, I suppose, an ethics code that the court was very clear that they released this fall. And they said, this is the public's fault. We've always abided by this. The fact is you didn't understand it. So we're going to say it again. But the problems with the code are myriad, up to and including it's unenforceable, and the justices will decide for themselves when they violate it. There's no transparency, as you said, there's no check. And in the process of having this national conversation about what feels like an exigent legitimacy crisis, the court at every turn has insulted the public. So whether it's John Roberts, the Chief Justice, refusing to show up for a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing last spring to discuss this, whether it's Samuel Alito penning an interview in the Wall Street Journal last spring in which he essentially said, Congress has no authority over us. We do what we want. This portrait that the court has offered us, which is we are uncheckable because we are monarchical, we are perfect and nobody can touch us. And also in the face of almost weekly revelations of really shocking misconduct, including, how the Dobbs decision came down, a brilliantly reported piece in the New York Times. The answer consistently is not that we're going to fix ourselves, but that we are unfixable. And so it's very hard to see how this turns out well, particularly in a year where it's increasingly clear this court needs public legitimacy because they may decide the presidential election.
Ian, I've got one last question for you. It's going to be about 30 seconds. There has been a call for Clarence Thomas to recuse himself regarding the upcoming cases that are likely going to be before the case and Jenny Thomas's connection to January 6th. Is there any chance that that's going to happen, and should it?
I am more likely to grow a set of bat wings and fly around my condo than I am for Clarence Thomas to recuse from any case because of concerns about him being, politically or, corrupted in any way. He should resign. You don't get to take the kind of money that he's taken and stay in government office, but there's no enforcement mechanism, and so nothing's going to happen to him.
Dahlia Lithwick and Ian Millhiser, the Batman. Thank you to you both. Happy New Year. That is going to do it.